Hello everyone. I'm going to introduce a paradigm in cognitive science to you today that you probably all have an opinion about: behaviorism. Remember Watson's experiments on little Albert, or Pavlov's dogs, or Thorndike's cat puzzle boxes, or the Skinner box? Exactly. Let me start by telling you a bit about the historical underpinnings of behaviorism. So the substrate on which behaviorism is grounded can be traced as far backwards as Aristotle, who first pitched the scientific method as a way to understand the world. It continues with Descartes, who already had an idea of behavior similar to those of the early behaviorists. Because Catholic censorship was high at his time, he was inclined to differentiate between animals and humans and added the mind as a uniquely human feature to human behavior. The mind-body dualism was born. In his theory, the mind gave humans the possibility to act voluntarily. Later, with Darwin, the idea of humans being separate from all other animals became challenged further. Evolutionary theory and selectionism were important stepping stones for rising behavioristic theories. Simultaneously, to the structuralism of Wundt and Titchener and the phenomenological view of Husserl and Freud that gained popularity in psychology in the 19th century, behaviorism was aimed to keep psychology tied to objectively observable measures. Its mission was to eventually place psychology within the framework of the natural sciences, implying a willingness to study human behavior exactly as other events in the natural world are studied. In 1913, John B. Watson published Psychology as the Behaviorist Views It, or as some call it, the Behaviorist Manifesto. His program had three major underpinnings: no philosophical dualism, meaning no distinction between the physical world and conscious states, observability from an objective viewpoint, and a goal to find the natural laws that alter behavior in all living organisms. In retrospect, Watson's behaviorism was labeled as classical or methodological behaviorism. This early definition of behaviorism is what most textbooks come up with, and this is also the form that was attacked by the cognitivists later on. Heavily influenced by logical positivist theory, Watsonian behavior science confines itself to events that can be observed by two or more people. Truth must be truth by agreement. What one sees through introspections does not qualify. Hence, because it is out of reach of the view of a second person, the private world of thoughts and feelings and states of minds is out of the scope for a science of behavior. Watson further argued for finding a general science of behavior. He was against anthropocentrism and asked, why should laws of behavior be only valid for humans and not placed on a spectrum of complexity? Similar to how a biologist views evolution and inheritance. In order to achieve this, he suggested getting rid of conceptual terms like consciousness, mental states, mind, etc., to free psychology from its human-centered view. What is so offensive about this proclamation is actually a parallelism with Darwin's naturalistic account of evolution. Darwin left out the hidden hand of God in creation of the species. Behaviorists offend by leaving out another hidden force, namely the power of individuals to direct their own behavior. In other words, they deny the idea of free will. Let's move on to B.F. Skinner now. He established his own take on behaviorism and named it radical behaviorism. Why radical? Because Skinner believed that the science of behavior is not only possible, but that it can be a natural science and that it can include all of human behavior. Here is a textbook definition.
Behaviorism is simply an effort to explain behavior in terms of the genetic and environmental histories of an organism, including the human organism, rather than in terms of mental states, feelings, attitudes, and other things attributed to an inner man.
Building onto Thorndike's discoveries on the laws of reinforcement and punishment, called the law of effect, Skinner came up with the term operant behavior, which is defined as a freely emitted behavior by the organism, so not a reflex. Plus, it is susceptible to its consequences, namely to reinforcement or punishment. Positive consequences reinforce behavior. Behaviors will be repeated in a similar situation in the future. That's why positive consequences are called reinforcers. Negative consequences weaken behavior. If the organism receives an aversive stimulus for its action, this reduces the possibility for it to act in this way again. These are called punishments.
And you're doing things because consequences have followed when you've done it.
Skinner said, behaviorism is often said to treat behavior simply as response to stimulus, but stimuli do not trigger operant responses. They simply modify the probability that responses will be emitted. Described respondent behavior with a two-term contingency of stimulus and response, and operant behavior with a three-term contingency of antecedent behavior and consequence. Those two distinct types of behavior can be connected to two different types of learning. First, classical conditioning or stimulus pairing, like Pavlov showed in his experiments, where he associated the conditioned stimulus of the bell for the dogs with the unconditioned stimulus of the food. And then operant conditioning, where behavior is shaped and selected by its environmental consequences. The environment is the factor that shapes behavior. However, environment in this sense means everything the organism is able to perceive, be it inside or outside of its own self. Philosophically, Skinner extended the notion of behaviorism to include private events, or, as he would call it, covert behavior, and declare them as a form of behavior and therefore as a legitimate subject matter of a behavioral analysis. What led him to this extension was the progress neuroscience made in the first half of the century, and he acknowledged that in time we would be able to have more information of what's going on inside the brain that was previously excluded from external observation. Behavior is defined as something that varies depending on how it affects the environment. In this sense, thoughts alter the environment because they change the individual's perception of this environment. Skinner saw that antecedents of behavior can be found inside as well as outside of the body. Indeed, he often emphasized that variations in ease of observation do not create differences in status that are important to the analysis of behavior and its causes. He stated, the skin is not that important a boundary. Private and public events have the same kinds of physical dimensions. He stated that in About Behaviorism in 1974, and although this was written only after the cognitive turn, already in his seminal book, Science and Human Behavior, Skinner had whole chapters acknowledging the importance of thoughts and feelings and giving thought as of how to treat them within a natural science of behavior. Allegedly, behaviorism died shortly after the cognitive revolution, initiated by Chomsky's critique of Skinner's verbal behavior. It may come as a surprise that only after that, in fact, all dedicated journals concerning behavior analysis have been established. Behaviorism resided as a niche discipline, but it brought about significant additions to the understanding of the basic principles underlying behavior and learning during the past decades, with major contributions to neighboring disciplines such as machine learning, epigenetic research, and cognitive biology. In cognitive science today, and in the currently popular paradigms, a lot of behavioristic notions are well integrated and unquestioned. Think of, for example, the 4E approaches, which emphasize the importance of the environment and the body for cognition and behavior, or the Bayesian brain hypothesis that takes into account the learning history of an organism, moving from a momentary view of cognition to a continuous cumulative one. Thank you for listening.